Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, The Role of Operational Excellence in Best-in-Class Distribution. My name is Robbie Cluett, your host, and I'm excited to have you join us for this important discussion on achieving supply chain excellence through warehouse optimization. Now, warehousing is a cornerstone of the supply chain, and its role in the success of any retailer, wholesale distributor, cannot be overstated, especially around the holidays, as we are at the time of this recording. In today's session, we'll explore the evolving role of warehousing, the latest trends shaping the industry, practical strategies for optimization, and what the future holds for warehouse operations. To guide us through this journey, I'm thrilled to introduce our guest, Rodney Bonds. Rodney is a highly experienced supply chain executive with a proven track record of driving transformation in warehousing and distribution across many different organizations. I personally worked with Rodney for a number of years on various optimization projects, and his proven experience, as well as his unwavering commitment to continuous improvement and best-class distribution, is why I've asked him to join us for this webinar today. Rodney, it's an honor to have you with us today.
Thank you, Robbie. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Now, I'm going to introduce the segments that we're going to cover today. We're going to do a bit of a discussion and interview style webinar here. And here's how it's going to be structured. So we'll break the discussion into four key segments. First, we're going to examine the essential role that warehouses play in supply chain excellence. Then we'll get into key trends and advancements driving warehouse optimization. Then we'll look at some practical solutions and strategies that companies are adopting to stay ahead. And finally, we'll explore where warehouse optimization is headed in the next 5 to 10 years. And again, we'll try to keep this as conversational as possible as we go through each question. But before we do that, Rodney, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of give everybody a background on your experience and sort of what you're going to be drawing from as we go through these questions.
Okay. Well, that sounds good. Well, I would say I'm a supply chain professional, been in supply chain for 30 years, very diverse supply chain background. So I've done food and beverage, I've done retail, agricultural, various different sorts, and have drawn experience from each one of those situations. So I think it sets me up to be able to have a good discussion with you here today, Robbie.
Absolutely. And again, we're thrilled to have you. So let's start with the big picture, Rodney. So warehouses play a critical role in supply chain operations, as you know. Now, what makes optimizing warehouse processes such an essential part of achieving supply chain excellence?
Well, I would say a couple of things for me come to mind. First and foremost, what I would say is that cost reduction is probably one of the big ones, because inefficient warehouses ultimately going to be higher cost warehouses, and those costs are going to be passed all the way along through, whether that be labor, whether that be an excessive inventory, or whatever the case may be, would be one point. Secondarily, I would say that from standpoint of optimized warehouses, you are better equipped to handle volatile situations that you find yourself within a supply chain environment. So volumes at a steady state, you hit volumes, spikes, peaks, you hit COVID, you hit different things of that nature. So an optimized warehouse is better equipped to absorb those difficulties and be able to make it out on the other side, make it through and out to the other side successfully, would be the two biggest things. And then I would say, lastly, inefficient warehouses are not reliable from the standpoint of meeting the customer demands and the customer needs. So the more optimized the warehouses are, the more efficient they are, the more consistent they're going to be from a process perspective, and going to deliver consistent results.
Right. And do you think that obviously we both saw kind of what happened through COVID in terms of the spikes in demand for certain products, and how some warehouses were able to deal with it. Other retailers, they had months of delays. Do you think this has always been the case, I think, for people that are in warehousing, but now do you think it highlights in the average organization? Do you think it sort of highlights over the last 5 years the importance, or do you think it's sort of do you think there's any sort of trend that's happened in the last, say, 5 years that have made this more apparent? What are your thoughts there? Like, is it more apparent? Is it more important now than it has ever been?
I would say it's more important now than it's ever been. I think during COVID it hit its peak,
Hmm.
and because of the coverage or media coverage around it and those things, I think a lot of
Hmm.
people went out and had activities and took on things then that they hadn't done in the past. I think since then things have softened just a bit, right? Because you're
Hmm.
not in that very adverse situation. But I would say one of the things that I have seen happen as a derivative of COVID has been more companies getting a mix of suppliers where they're not just heavily reliant on international, they're
Hmm.
doing domestic and having a domestic backup. So in the event that something happens from an international perspective,
Hmm.
um, then they are equipped to be able to handle their volumes and or support their needs locally
Right.
and not be subject to the delays that we saw before and potentially could be coming again as we get into 2025.
Hmm. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Now, in terms of we just covered the the external factors, like say there's obviously disruptions like COVID. There's other things that happen in the market. There's elections. There's tons of stuff that happens where, you may see demand go up and down. You may see people buy certain things in certain times that don't make any sense. But in terms of the internal, say, trends or advancements that you're seeing, can you point to anything in terms of a technological advancement, any sort of trend that's in the industry that's pushing companies, to focus more on optimizing warehouses? Is that the availability of technology, robotics, analytics, things like that? Like, what are you seeing that's kind of pushing them to head into that direction and also enabling it to happen?
Yes, I would say probably for me it would be first and foremost. I think the evolution and the growth of e-commerce and the
Mhm.
omni-channel has played a big role because with that, then customer expectations have changed. So
Mhm.
they're looking for quicker deliveries, more. They're looking for more accurate deliveries and shipments. I think on a consistent basis. So
Mhm.
you, in order to play in that game, then you have to meet a certain level of expectation. So I think that in itself is one of the big things that has kind of pushed companies looking to optimize their warehousing. And then I
Mhm.
think secondarily is the shortage of labor. So
Mhm.
with labor being so hard to both recruit and retain, then companies are having to look at ways to optimize their respective environments without that heavy reliance on the people factor. I
Mhm.
think companies that find themselves at this point still heavily reliant and needing to grow through a people-driven environment
Mhm.
are the ones that are having a bit more difficult time, and those that have sought out other things like automation
Mhm.
and things of that nature, I think are and or technology, enabling themselves with the right technology, I think are finding themselves in a better position today.
Mhm. Yeah, and with our company, one of the things we do notice is even for larger organizations, like you look at the Walmarts, you look at the larger like Kroger's, the larger retailers in the country, where they have hundreds of sites, and billions of dollars, theoretically to play with and invest. Even they don't, they're able to take advantage of automation only in a few of their sites, right? It's still very expensive technology even for the larger companies, and so even those guys, they still have to figure out ways to optimize a conventional layout. But the labor shortage is hurting them just as much as anybody else, because there's never going to be a company that's going to be able to fully automate their entire network. So I think, we can see it happening. We can see it in the news that there's a ton of automation, but at least for today, the ability or the necessity to optimize a conventional operation is never been more important um, because you can only automate that so much.
Right.
Um, Now, the next question I would have for you, Rodney, is more on the practical standpoint. I'm wondering if you can share some practical strategies or solutions that companies are adopting right now. We mentioned, adding in automation. We mentioned a few things, but any other strategies or solutions that companies are adopting to optimize their warehouse operations? Anything you can think of outside of potentially adding in automation or anything like that?
Well, I know the automation piece. What I've seen there is people putting in autonomous robotics to both
Mhm.
attack the travel side of
Mhm.
things as well as the pick bots. So
Mhm.
those two things I know from a automated and robotic perspective, I've seen more of that than has been the case in the past.
Mhm.
I would say at a very fundamental level, the next thing that I've seen is, and it's amazing at this day and age that you don't see 100% adoption, but I think more companies have went to a traditional warehouse management system where a lot of
Mhm.
companies um, weren't necessarily on a warehouse management system. You know, there are efficiencies from a visibility, from a real time data, from all those things that a warehouse management system provides.
Mhm.
So I think I've seen more of that, where more companies that may not have used it before are
Mhm.
using some of the solutions that are less expensive that they can get into and do some of the basic functions. I've
Mhm.
seen that, and then I would say the one other area that I've seen is along the line of what you guys do is
Mhm.
optimizing the layout of the warehouse,
Mhm.
and therefore being able to make the warehouse environment more productive by reducing travel and by proper assortment and reducing bottlenecks and things of that nature that SKU Stream
Mhm.
I know does. I think those have been some of the other gains that I've seen on the execution system side is where
Mhm.
more companies are more open to taking those things on and understand the benefits they can gain in that side of the business.
Mhm. Yeah, introducing new KPIs, new metrics to the operation that weren't looked at before. I think that's one of the major things. And pointing leadership into, isolating those things. Looking at trade-offs between, like you mentioned, travel, looking at trade-offs between optimizing the inbound travel or the inbound put away versus the outbound travel. There's always been a trade-off there, and some are more noticeable in the operation than others. And also bringing in things like product damage and safety and all these things that make a huge impact. Obviously not just on your personnel, but on your bottom line as well. And the more information you have about these things, the easier they are to optimize. And that's really the nature of optimization in general. It's not just turning those levers and working within constraints, but it's also highlighting where the opportunity is in the first place. And I think that's where a lot of companies they don't necessarily, if they don't have the data, they don't know where to turn. They don't know where to actually start in the first place. And that's sort of where everything gets kind of baked into the status quo and the cost of doing business,
Yes, I
which
would I would agree.
yeah. And the cost to do
I
business is belongs that status quo that companies are really trying to break free of right now, I think.
Right, and a lot of that I would say, back to my original point,
Hmm.
is the warehouse management system and it will enable that, but it
Hmm.
doesn't do it for you. So there's still some work and
Exactly.
some lifting and some mind share and knowledge base that's required in order to make sure
Yeah.
that you have the right actionable metrics that
Hmm.
when you drive those that you drive the proper outcomes. Those behaviors are driven and then you get the proper outcomes to go
Hmm.
along with that. I think there is still quite a bit of opportunity on that side.
Yeah, and that draws me back to one of the conversations we had at a conference. We did one of these webinars a couple of years ago. We actually talked a lot about the trend of continuous improvement in warehousing. So, what Toyota was doing in manufacturing 50 years ago, a lot of companies are now folding into their warehousing is like creating a feedback loop, creating a situation where you're looking for improvement opportunities at every turn. And whatever method you're following on continuous improvement, there's still that willingness, I think, where there wasn't before in
Right.
warehousing, that it's always existed in manufacturing situations. Removing errors, trying to get better, trying to make every piece within whatever makes up your warehouse, isolating those pieces, looking at every individual piece, and trying to make each one of them better. And as a whole, naturally everything is going to be better if you isolate the pieces of the whole. So, um, now, are there any specific industries, and I know you have experience in a few different industries, and we work together in a couple of them, but most notably in grocery, and our history is primarily grocery, I would say, which is where a lot of companies are looking to optimize just based off the margins and the types of products that are being shipped. But are there any specific industries or types of companies where these solutions that you've mentioned, that these practical solutions, where they're particularly impactful? Would you say that there's
Yeah.
certain industries that really should be looking into this?
Yeah, I would say a couple that I know on conversations I've had and things I've been involved in, e-commerce and retail for certain,
Mhm, mhm,
because of the rapid order fulfillment requirements that are there, and
mhm,
then the as we are now in this that time of year, or just
mhm,
coming out of it, you hit your peaks and valleys. So you hit
mhm,
seasonal volumes that are going to be extreme,
mhm,
above and beyond what the norm are,
mhm,
and then you normalize as you go into next year. So I
mhm,
would say those have been much more open to it because of
mhm,
those dynamics they play, and
mhm.
because that's a growing part of the retail business is the omni-channel, the e-commerce. I
Right.
would say probably a staple where it's been important is on the third party side, because third
Mhm,
party companies, they run very complex multi client, multi customer environments.
mhm,
So those being just complex in their nature, the ability to be able to have visibility to make sure that you have proper space utilization, to make sure that where you are able to, that you do cross dock and things of that nature that can reduce touches
mhm,
and streamline processes and improve or increase throughput, I think
mhm,
are ones that I've seen. And then lastly, as you mentioned a moment ago, with
mhm,
heavy background and focus on food and beverage, both
mhm,
you guys and myself, then
mhm,
food and beverage, ultimately, um, quite a bit more there because of the stringent inventory control practices and procedures that are needed. You have the temperature requirements that are a part of
mhm,
that for both the handling on the road and from a storage perspective, right?
mhm,
So you have those different dynamics at play
mhm,
that are important, because if not, then you're going to endure and/or you're going to be impacted negatively by spoilage and
mhm.
loss, right? So I think
Yeah.
those are areas where I've seen um, the adoption and individuals taking it much more seriously and looking at it as a viable option to potentially do some things differently.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, talking about constraints, that's uh a big keyword there, is because I don't know many industries that have more constraints than say a grocery distributor. Whether you talk about temperature zones, you talk about chemicals, you talk about, just damaged goods in general, you talk about different product handling requirements. The more constraints you have, the more difficult it is to optimize, to turn those levers to optimize within those constraints. And so the more data you have, we always find is to highlight, automate whatever you can, automate the decisions of where to put products, and then have, say, an advanced system make the decisions for you. Right? We did a study, not an in-depth study, but we looked at the decisions that were going into every slotting or the number of decisions that go into slotting items on a daily basis. And I don't want to misquote it, but I'll probably put it in the description of the webinar. I'll highlight the blog post, but there's just an insurmountable number of decisions that, especially within grocery, that slotters have to make when it comes to putting products where they're most productive, and to have a system to do that for them, because it's just impossible. Like, we can sit here and say that it's possible to make all these decisions, but the reality is, even if they had 8 hours a day, they couldn't make every single decision needed to fully optimize. Um,
Right.
Especially when they're doing other things. So I think looking at the constraints, and making sure that if there's a high number of constraints in your business, getting advanced data to help you optimize within those constraints, is always a good thing. It's always helpful for
Right.
your people.
Agreed.
Um, and the last thing that I would ask you, Rodney, is looking ahead, where do you see warehouse optimization heading in the next 5 to 10 years? And we talked about automation, but and advanced systems. Do you think that companies are going to be leaning more into those, or do you think there's another, what else do you think is ahead for in the area of warehouse optimization within the next 5 to 10 years? Do you think it's adding roles? And what we've seen on our side, anyways, we've noticed a change on organizational structures. So companies are adding roles, they're adding departments even. It's not necessarily happening at the warehouse level, but more in terms of like the structure of the company itself. And we read for public companies, and as an example, read a lot of public companies that are now coming out and saying we're restructuring our organization, we're adding these roles in, we're adding optimization roles, we're adding operational excellence roles. That's one of the reasons why this webinar exists, is because we've seen it so often happen in the industry, and we wanted to bring you and Rodney to get your opinion on it, because it's something we've seen a ton, especially for public companies, because it's a great PR, a way of getting out to shareholders and say, hey, we're paying attention to profitability, not just growth. I think that was one of the biggest things after COVID, was a lot of companies were growing, the revenues are growing, but the profitability was sort of drying up. And so a lot of companies had to rethink, maybe we need to add more roles to actually look at efficiency, to look at, lessening the cost, because if we can't lessen the cost, it doesn't matter how fast we're growing, because we're still spending the money. So that's one of the biggest things that we've noticed, and that kind of transcends, whatever technologies they're looking at, because you can have a technology, if you don't have the leadership per se in your organization to guide it, then it doesn't matter. If you don't have a home for the technology, then we've certainly seen that that unless there's a home, unless there's an initiative, sometimes you can add a technology that costs millions of dollars, like automation, for example. If there's no strategy, then it goes unused, or it goes underutilized, which is horrible to see, but it happens. So for you, Rodney, does that sort of resonate with what you've seen as well, or do you see it going in any different directions?
No, I think you hit on two very important points, Robbie, and I will just reinforce kind of what you said. Is from a org structure perspective, I've seen, read, and spoke to individuals that have made changes within their organization. Um, I would say it a couple of different aspects. Number one, adding additional roles
Mm-hmm.
and roles that are geared towards optimization and geared towards efficiency or center of excellence. I've
Mm-hmm.
seen that, and then I think the other thing that I've seen is more decentralized decision making, where
Mm-hmm.
it's not all the decisions aren't coming back to one place, and then the
Mm-hmm.
timing that's associated with that, and then being cascaded down. I think
Mm-hmm.
more um, decision making ability is being given out in the field, which then speeds up things, and
Mm-hmm.
just the entire cycle time for processes improve based
Mm-hmm.
on not making those extra stops or having to go through that additional layers within the
Mm-hmm.
organization. So I think that was on the organizational structure side. I would say that, and then on
Mm-hmm.
the leadership side, I would say, to your point, you if you go out and make the investment in systems and adoption of systems
Mm-hmm.
and you go and put the dollars into automation or you put it into um, understanding the right KPIs, if you don't
Mm-hmm.
have the right leadership that is trained
Mm-hmm.
and equipped
Mm-hmm.
and developing expertise in both that technology and in data analytics to be able to take that and add value into the situation,
Mm-hmm.
then it's all lost. The
Yeah.
investment's been made for nothing until you, to your point earlier,
Mm-hmm.
that's probably the biggest negative that you can have come out of the situation, that you make the investment, you
Mm-hmm.
pony up to the cost as an organization, and then it doesn't manifest the kind of gains or improvements or the
Mm-hmm.
profitability that you're looking for. So I think one of the areas that I will call out that's very important. I won't say I've seen this as much yet, but I think
Mm-hmm.
making that leadership investment to make sure that you develop the expertise and develop the skill set and develop the things that are necessary to
Mm-hmm.
be able to foster those things and to manifest those into successes. And then I
Mm-hmm.
would say last thing is along with that is with that comes a whole degree of change management. So I think that's
Mm-hmm.
another skill that becomes very important because now the workforce or the work environment will change, and
Mm-hmm.
you have to have individuals that are equipped to be able to not only understand the new technologies and the new metrics and those things, you have
Mm-hmm.
to have ones that are skilled to be able to take that and then articulate it to people and explain the change and explain the positives and what it's
Mm-hmm.
going to do for the environment ultimately in order to be able to drive it towards success. So I think you need to from a leadership perspective, it's two sides of that. Both
Mm-hmm.
the technologies and the thought process around different metrics and those things, but then the
Mm-hmm.
change management side of that as well.
Hmm. Yeah, and to your point too, and talking about people, and it actually it's a great segue into we have another webinar coming up in another month, which we'll release in the early part of 2025. But it's about it's a bit deeper into the subject of optimization within a warehouse optimization. And we've noticed the rise of a role that's not necessarily called the slotting strategist. That's kind of what we call it internally. But if you think about an analyst and you reference the people that have the skills to make decisions based off the new data that they're seeing. And for companies that we work with, we do see a lot of people that are in warehouses. Obviously, they have a ton of experience, and most of them are, if you give them the tools or the analytics to make these decisions, they will usually grab the opportunity. It's just the fact that they don't have it previously, or they were overwhelmed with screens and data that they had to bring together themselves, and they just didn't have time to do it. If you give them the technology to make these decisions, a lot of times you have that skill already there. It's just a matter of
Right.
providing leadership towards it, making sure that it's the metric that you're all aligned on what you're looking for, whether it's capacity numbers, whether it's product damage, whether it's putaways, it's replenishments, it's selection travel, it's let's make sure we're attacking all the same, or we get on the same page with what we're going after. But we kind of noticed that there is a skill already there. There's people that are there. There's analysts that are extremely good at their job. They know exactly what they're doing. Is if they have the ability or the technology at their disposal to help them make these decisions and to affect change, and the right leadership is there. We've noticed, in addition to operational excellence departments, for example, we've noticed that there's specific roles, to your point, that get added. Whether you call it a slotting strategist or more of an analytics minded person within each operation to sort of call out these improvement opportunities, right? To see underneath the iceberg of where some of these operational improvement opportunities exist. So that's sort of it's a great segue into our next webinar, which we'll have some information on for those who are listening now that want to stay tuned for that one. It's the next part in the series, but we'll dive deeper into the specifics of the different roles that we're seeing. So that brings us to the end of today's webinar. We had a short one today, Rodney. The webinar again was called "The Role of Operational Excellence and Best-in-Class Distribution." That's something very much about, and we really appreciate you joining us and sharing your insights and expertise with us. Your perspective on the role of warehousing, key trends, practical strategies, and the future optimization has been incredibly valuable. I want to give you an opportunity to have the final word. If there's anything else that you've left out or any questions that I didn't ask that you're hoping to answer, feel free to have the floor and tell people what you're up to and where they can find you on LinkedIn if you like as well.
Yes. I would say my contact information, I think, is going to be a part of
Mhm,
the webinar information when it's put out. So please,
mhm,
for anyone interested in looking at ways to optimize their warehouse environment,
mhm,
please feel free to reach out to me via LinkedIn and or my other contact information that we provided. Typically, my approach to things is before you talk about automation, before you talk about technology, you get a lot of bang for your buck just with process. So
mhm,
the approach that we typically take is looking at how we can improve processes and
mhm,
scale those
mhm,
and make those more efficient to then produce outcomes and maximize that before you go look to any type of an investment.
mhm,
So for anyone interested in that, that's certainly the approach we take. And then I
mhm,
would say the last piece that I would add to our conversation is
mhm,
that the operational excellence piece is not a one-time, one-stop achievement, but it's an
mhm,
ongoing, continuous journey that is constantly pushing you to continue to look at your environment and look to change things that are going to ultimately move things forward. So
mhm,
anyone taking on that approach for their respective organizations, that'd be
mhm,
one of the key things to take in mind, that you don't do it and you're done. It's
mhm.
one of those things that's just an ongoing, ever evolving situation that you have to constantly manage in order to get
Yeah.
the value out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such an important part as well, where everybody's been a part of a project where the project itself, maybe it went well, maybe it didn't, maybe there's hiccups, which every project happens every project, but we've all been a part of these projects where at the end, even if it was a great success, some people leave the project. Some like it becomes, if you're not paying enough attention to where that, if it's the technology, if it's a process, like to your point, if you're changing something, who's paying attention to the fact if it's like if it's going to be carried forward beyond just the project itself. Like it's not just the project. It's not just, okay, we're done. We've implemented a technology, we're done. We don't have to worry about it anymore. It still needs guidance. It still needs a home within the operation. And that's kind of, what we push on our clients is to make sure that there's, you mentioned a change management strategy in place. So that one resonated with me as well. And because I've seen it a ton where it hasn't had that proper guidance. We for sure know what happens if that's the case. So very important to make sure that it's a long-term strategy. It's not even just a project. This is what you're doing now, and you're carrying it forward until you're, say it doesn't work, or in perpetuity. There's no end date to that.
Yeah, and typically what happens in that situation is then you have the technology or whatever the investment was or execution system
Mhm.
is at thought for something that actually was
Exactly.
leadership driven, right?
Mhm.
Leadership didn't drive it, so the
Yeah.
technology didn't work.
Yeah.
Whereas if leadership drove it, the technology works fine. So you get into
Exactly.
that slippery slope where
Mhm.
it starts to change the view of things around where the success lies. It typically
Yeah.
ultimately lies for the people, and then you can enable and maximize the technology.
Exactly. Yeah. It's especially for systems where it's technically discretionary, right? So we have a WMS that gets used every day to manage the operation, but it doesn't, you mentioned it in one of your answers, it doesn't inherently show you where to improve, right? It's not the job of a WMS. It's there to manage the existing operation. It doesn't highlight improvement opportunities. Now, what we're seeing is these discretionary systems are not so discretionary anymore. They used to be discretionary where people used to be able to say, well, if I have time, I'll use it to improve the operation. Now it's less discretionary. Now it's okay, here are your metric KPIs. Here's what we're looking for. We need you to say we're going back to reslotting. Say we'll reslot 50 items a week, where we slot 100 items a week. We'll look at this much savings because they know what's there at that point, right? Especially if it's proven.
Right.
So I think that's sort of the difference between that discretionary versus indiscretionary, where you have to use it versus do I don't need to use it. But that's where leadership comes in. That's where that direction comes in. It's like, okay, you don't technically have to use it. The operation's not going to stop, but at the end of the month, at the end of the year, at the end of the quarter, you still want to have that savings. Like you still need to generate
Right.
those savings. You still don't have to have those costs that you're paying out. So I think a lot of companies are now viewing it as this is not really an option anymore. So, um,
Agreed.
I appreciate again your time, Rodney, and I also want to thank our audience for whoever joined us. We're hoping that you're leaving today's session with a lot of actionable takeaways to apply in your operations and a lot of good insight. And again, I'll put Rodney's information on the screen as well as ours if you want to learn more about this webinar. If you have any questions, any feedback, please don't hesitate to reach out, and we'll make sure our contact information is there for you guys to see. Stay tuned for more webinars that we'll be putting out in 2025. There's lots of great content ahead, so we appreciate the first of many that you stopped by to watch the first of many. So appreciate your time again, and thank you very much for stopping by. And thank you again, Rodney.
Yeah, thank you, Robbie. Thanks to the audience. Appreciate it.